your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
All right, good evening, horror fans. Welcome to another edition of the Weekly Horoscope. I am Jerry, your host, here with my partner Matt. And Matt, this week we're going back in time, really to the start of what you might consider horror films. We skipped the silent era, but really when the
Yeah.
talkies came in, when there's sound and there's audio and there's talking, we really went back. Our topic is best of the decade. We're going to look at the 1930s. So we are going way back to the start.
Yeah, the 1930s horror was developed around post-World War One, which gave birth to, gargantuan tyranny and death through science and technology. The world began to live amongst horror of hundreds of millions of people dying for the first time ever. And that created a lens of macabre that had never really been displayed on the new era of film, even though it's still in its infancy. And so it gave birth to a lot of interesting ideas that kind of shocked people in a new way for the first time.
Yeah, for sure. And I found it, I always found it interesting, looking back as a kid. 1931 brought us the definitive iteration of Dracula with the Bela Lugosi playing the Count. In the same year brought us our first movie for tonight, the definitive iteration of Frankenstein, 1931, directed by James Whale. What'd you think of this movie, Matt?
It's very tame by today's standards. But the Frankenstein, that creation that they made for the movie was the model for which we use Frankenstein to this day. It's not even described that way in Mary Shelley's book. She doesn't even really describe it that much in the book. She kind of says it's instruments of the human body, like a compilation of instruments of the human body. She doesn't really give a true definition of it. So when they came up with the Frankenstein monster for this movie, they kind of just like went with their own thing. And to this day, we still use that, which is, it just speaks to how iconic the movie is.
The image is instantly recognizable by anyone, kids. If you show a 7-year-old, they instantly know who it is, what it is.
Yep.
Which is a real testament to a movie over 90 years old. We start with Henry Frankenstein, which was a switch. The book, it's Victor. In the movie, they call him Henry, and his assistant Fritz, and they're hanging out at funerals, waiting to dig up fresh bodies, and they cut down freshly hanged persons. It was, different
very
world.
gothic.
Yeah, different world back then. And we get some of the universal horror of the era with the mist and the very gothic presentation, as you mentioned. A lot of light and shadows combined to make creepy images, but like you say, very tame by today's standards.
But very atmospheric, even going back to like the universal touch that they had, like even with the Wolfman, which we had discussed a couple episodes ago.
Yeah. So they still need a brain for their project. So Fritz breaks into a medical college where two brains were being discussed, and they were showing the difference between a normal brain and a violent deviant. And there were actually physical differences in the presentation of the brain. The professor there is a Dr. Waldman, who actually was Henry's instructor. So Fritz breaks in at night, and he picks up the jar with the normal brain in it, and then he's startled by a noise and drops it and shatters it. So he is forced to take the deranged, the deviant brain, and bring that back for their experiment.
And that's almost, to me, maybe like nowadays, that's maybe through the decades and decades of how we've got to where we are in film. To me, that seems almost comedic, like almost satirical. Like, I don't know if that was meant to be satirical, but that's something you'd see in like a comedy. Like, oh, I dropped the regular brain, got to pick up the other one. Like, it didn't even seem like
it's
like it, I don't. Yeah,
it's a great point, because the scene is hysterically satired in Young Frankenstein, a comedy that Mel Brooks made in the 70s.
right.
And And for satiring the scene, they don't have to change a lot.
Right. It's just is what it
It's
is.
just presented in a funny manner, but the idea is exactly the same. So a good call on that. Henry has a fiancee, Elizabeth, and she is talking to their friend Victor, which kept throwing me off because Frankenstein's name, the doctor's name, was Victor in the book. Instead, they have a friend named Victor.
They arbitrarily switched the names, and
yeah, it just confused me for a while. But Elizabeth expresses concern about the experiments and Henry's obsession and his seclusion. They're supposed to be getting married, and Henry is just, I got to work on this. This is important, and just leave me alone.
Yeah.
So they decide to go to Dr. Waldman for some insight into Henry's plans. And Waldman tells them that Henry has expressed a desire to create life. So with that concern in tow, the three of them pack up to go find Henry's lab, and they arrive just as he's making the final preparations to reanimate his monster. And at first he sends them away. And finally, it's raining. It's a stormy, dark and stormy night, if you will. Finally, he relents to let him in out of the elements.
Which is another classic part to the story, is that there had to be lightning for this to kind of work. It almost seems like it's like the archaic technology that they're using.
Yeah, the power source. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in a weird turn, they question his sanity almost, and his approach to what he's doing. And he went from turning them away to now he's got to show them. He's like, well, now you got to see my achievement.
Yeah.
Which I just thought was such a quick turn from somebody who didn't want to be disturbed. Now he wants to show off.
Well, there's that saying that greatness and madness are neighbors, and they're borrowing each other's sugar.
There you go. Great. That's a good one. In the what I think is a well-designed lab that he brings them up to, they're raising the body up in the storm, and there's dials and there's electric things zapping back and forth, and there's bubbling
very
beakers.
very Tesla like. Yeah
it's kind of a cool, I thought that was well designed for the day. They raise them up and they lower them back down after the lightning bursts and everything happens, and we see the hand of the creature start to move, and then Henry goes into the famous it's alive rant. At one point even saying that now he knows what it feels like to be a god, which is way over the top. They banned
that from the theaters originally, didn't they?
Yes, just because it was sacrilege,
right?
And you would think anybody making that kind of statement would get their comeuppance at some point.
Yeah, it's an interesting point of censorship, because it's okay to create a monster that's going to kill people, but you can't. The scientists can't say that he's like a god. It was just really interesting, like where we place, like morality in film. At any given time in society. It's always funny to look back and see how that plays out.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing how much things have changed when you look at it that way. I'm not for any form of censorship, but certainly, this would be PG if rolled out today in its exact form. It's this point where Dr. Waldman tells Henry when he's revealing how he got some of these parts. He tells Henry that the brain stolen from his lab was that of a mad criminal, which Henry did not know up to this point.
Yeah, and he's kind of real nonchalant about it. He's like, yeah, well, okay, whatever.
Yeah, it's done. So I did, I'm godlike. I did what I had to do.
Yeah.
And here we finally get the reveal of the monster, and it's kind of the monster backs into a room, which seems a little strange for somebody just learning to walk and getting their motor skills up. But he does the slow turn around, and the camera zooms in, and there's where we first get to see the legendary visage with the brilliant makeup by Jack Pierce. He's got you see decay in the body, you see the surgical scars, you see sunken eyes, of course, the famous neck bolts, and
Yeah.
Boris
The
Karloff.
forehead, the forehead almost looks like something else was like put on top. It's like bulging. It has
Yeah,
that famous Frankenstein bulge. Yeah.
yeah, you could cook something up there on the flat top if you needed to. But then you also get Boris Karloff, who is the definitive iteration of Frankenstein for a reason. In his face, without saying much, he shows sadness, confusion, innocence, and then at also times menace. So the combination of the groundbreaking makeup for 1931 and Boris Karloff's portrayal, just boom, done.
Yeah. And also like that look of horror that he has on his face at times when like he doesn't understand what he's doing, but he knows he did something wrong. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like watching. It's almost like a giant 3-year-old who's
Mm-hmm.
just like rampaging through the class, but doesn't understand what he's doing. It was brilliant,
And
brilliant
there's a
acting.
scene coming up that's a perfect example of what you're talking about. That
Yeah,
that shows that wonderfully. Um, Fritz comes in and he's carrying a torch, and the fire upsets the monster. And they hold him down, and they get a control of him, and they get him chained up. And Fritz takes this opportunity to torment him with the fire. And at one point, we see him whipping the monster. And then, as a cutaway, we're watching the doctor in the lab. We hear Fritz scream, and we go up and we find that Fritz is dead, and the monster is on the loose. And
Mhm.
again, there's a lot of play on, who's the real monster here. And this is a case of, Fritz tormenting this creature that they built for no good reason.
Right. And not only that, but they've shunned him and neglected him immediately. So they brought him into existence and said, nope, no good, and just tortured him.
Yeah. Dr. Waldman, who's still there helping Henry, he manages to inject the creature and they get him subdued. And then Henry finally collapses as his father, Baron, and Elizabeth arrive. Baron had expressed concerns that he thought Henry was seeing another woman. So he set off to find out for himself what was really going on. And they happen to arrive just as all this is going on. And Henry collapses of exhaustion. So Baron and Elizabeth take Henry home, and Dr. Waldman is going to dispose of the creature as they've come to the realization he must be put down.
Yeah.
Well, none of that really works out because while Waldman is making the preparations to put an end to the creature comes to, and he chokes out the doctor and leaves. And we go back.
Which is that's a harrowing scene right there too. Actually, I thought that's one of the best scenes in the movie where his hand slowly starts to come up. And you can imagine back in 1931, like a movie theater, like I imagine there was like gasps,
Sure.
as that hand started to come up. Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't accustomed to creepy that we've grown accustomed to now.
Right.
Henry and Elizabeth are back at home, and they're making their wedding plans, and they're having a big party, almost like a pre-wedding party, and the whole village is celebrating the pending nuptials.
Well, it's a great idea because they created this monster, and then he kills someone. And they're like, "Listen, let's just get married."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's celebrate.
Let's invite everyone to town to our house, and we'll forget about what happened.
Yes, put it behind us. The monster, who's now wandering free on his own, comes across a little girl named Maria, and despite his look, Maria is bright and kind to him, and the monster's enamored with her, and they take, and she's given him flowers. And this scene was also edited at the original time because it was too horrific for viewers. But he's kneeling down and he's really engaged with the girl, and you can tell he's just fascinated. Yeah. And she starts throwing the heads of the flowers into the water and watching them float and saying they're pretty. And he picks up the little girl and throws her into the water, thinking, she's pretty too.
Yeah.
She does not float.
He
And of
was
course,
trying to do a nice, kind gesture, like, oh, "Okay, that's the game we're playing." Like he looked at
yeah,
it as a set of rules. We're playing a game, and it's like just like a 2 or 3 year old.
pretty things go in the water, and you're pretty. And here's a perfect example. This is the best example of what you were talking about in my mind. It was not malicious, and the fear and confusion on his face when it happens
Yeah,
is really, for a monster. You now have some sympathy for what this poor thing is going through.
yeah. The amount of expressions that he does throughout the movie it brings humanity to the monster.
Great word. Yeah, that's exactly right. Great. So at the wedding, they're waiting for the arrival of Dr. Waldman, and Victor arrives to tell them that Dr. Waldman was found strangled and the monster did it and is on the loose. At this point, the monster enters Elizabeth's room through the window, and we hear her scream. Monster goes back out the window, and they find Elizabeth unconscious. Well, at this point, Maria's father arrives into the village, and this is a very sad and touching scene. Everybody's gathered and celebrating, and he's just walking silently with the body of Maria in his arms,
Yeah.
just walking down the village, just in anguish.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's brilliant how they juxtapose like the death of this girl with the new beginnings of the marriage that they're celebrating in town, and they kind of like clash like this. They're trying to celebrate like new life with the marriage, and like here comes the death of this child, like because of the monster. And I thought that was really brilliant how they did that.
And it changes the tenor of the group immediately, and suddenly they're a lynch mob, and this is now the famed, many times duplicated, the mob with the pitchforks and the torches.
Pitchforks, yeah.
And they're all going out in search of the monster. I don't know how, they don't really explain how the group becomes aware of exactly what this is, or if they ever are, but they're on the hunt. The monster is hiding up in the hills, and during the search, he sees Henry, and he confronts him. And of course, he knocks Henry out unconscious, and then he carries him to the windmill while the mob and the torches follow. And the windmill is beautifully shot in my mind. It sits on a hill, and it just creates the movement of the blades, and the shadows offset the fire coming up. I thought it was just really well done.
Yeah.
The creature, the monster, climbs to the top of the windmill, and from there he throws Henry off. And you would think, well, the person who made the mistakes that Henry did is going to really get theirs. And he bounces off one of the blades of the windmill and falls to the ground. In my mind, that would almost be worse. But in the story, it served to break his fall to some degree.
Yeah, I felt like when I saw that, it's like falling from a tree and hitting every branch. Just making it worse.
Yeah. But he survived. Spared his life by bouncing off that windmill blade. And we see the mob light the windmill on fire with the monster inside. We see a large wooden beam fall on top of the monster, and flames engulf the room.
Yeah, just the harrowing scream that he has. You almost kind of feel bad.
Yeah, I think you do feel bad. I know.
Yeah.
Seeing this as a kid, I immediately, and I didn't quite understand some of the subtext, but I immediately sympathized with the monster.
Yeah, which is a testament to how brilliant that it's filmed, that even as a child you can see something like that and sympathize, because that's what they want you to do, because it is about bringing humanity into the monster.
Yeah, it's an iconic film for a reason. The portrayal is fantastic. I actually believe the sequel, the Bride of Frankenstein, I actually believe is a superior movie. It just takes everything we talked about and ups it a level. But just great, iconic, certainly one of the best of the 1930s.
I wanted to review that movie, but I wanted to visit this one first.
Gotcha. Yeah, you wouldn't have one without the other, and this certainly stands the test of time as an iconic movie. And
it's like Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2. You don't start with 2. You got to start with 1.
You got to start with 1, yeah, for sure.
All right.
All right, our second film, Best of the 1930s. So we only move forward 1 year, and it's the film Freaks, 1932, directed by Todd Browning. The year prior, Todd Browning was the director of the legendary Dracula that we mentioned.
Bela
Uh,
Lugosi. Yeah.
and despite the fact that Bela Lugosi is the Dracula that I will always think of, uh, in my opinion, Freaks is a better movie.
Mm.
And Freaks was very, very controversial at the time. The DVD version I've had for many, many years. There's a little a sidebar, and it's a written history of how people with abnormalities were treated and some of the things that happened to them over time. It was kind of like a little history lesson. I thought that was kind of cool. But
Yeah,
at the
that's
beginning
interesting.
of the movie, they start by saying they introduce the code of the freaks. And I'm using the term freaks only because that's how it's referred to in the movie. I don't want to
Right,
be
right.
derogatory in any way. But they say if you offend one, you offend them all.
Yeah.
And what I love about this movie is it's full of real circus performers, real people with abnormalities. And it does two things. It shows them in a manner which shows you all of their freakishness. It shows you all of their idiosyncrasies,
Yeah.
all of the things that makes them different. Then it also shows them in purely domestic and regular settings to show they're also just like everybody else.
Which was the most shocking part of this movie to me. I did not see any of this coming. I have never seen this movie before. It's the first time I've ever watched it, and it really captured me. I was very impressed, and it felt really ahead of its time. And I feel like there was more than one reason why it was kind of shunned and banned. We'll get into that as we
Sure.
talk about the movie, but something like Dracula and Frankenstein, those are movies that attempt to bring humanity to monsters, whereas Freaks, like, it attempts to bring humanity to actual people who are marginalized by society, which is to me a very interesting topic. Because we'll see that throughout the next 100 years. But this movie was 1932. I think it was just way ahead of its time. Like you said, they were just doing ordinary people things. Like, and it almost seems like the stuff they were doing was like kind of shining a light on like the stuff no one wanted to know that was going on in Hollywood in regular day life.
Hmm.
Just like the drinking, the crassness, and kind of the cheating and the harlotness of people, and just like, hey, this is just how these communities interact. It got rid of the perceived Catholicism that was in the everyday urban communities that everyone, the good old regular America. It kind of just got rid of all that and said, no, this is like a subset of society, and this is how they are. And
Yeah.
I think like shining a light on that, and on top of all of the visuals, was beautifully done.
Yeah, I think taking the outrageous and moving it into the mundane really puts a different twist on it. And I've loved this movie for when I discovered it was probably 30 years ago. I've always
Yeah,
been a fan.
a lot of
Um,
depth.
we start with a small person, a dwarf named Hans, who is mesmerized with a trapeze artist named Cleopatra, and he tells his fiancee, awkwardly, Frida, that
Yeah,
she is the most beautiful large person he has ever seen, which obviously doesn't make Frida very happy. She's also a small person, and they're the cutest little couple you could imagine.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, and at one point, he even tells her that he only has eyes for her, but it's apparent that's not true.
Hmm.
His infatuation is growing,
Yeah,
and he is part of this close knit group of abnormals. And there's conjoined twins, there's pinheads, there's the human torso, the half man, the bearded lady, a skeleton man. There's a stuttering clown, an
yeah,
armless girl. Um, there's a half woman, half man. In there, it's just a crazy mix. And most of these are legit circus performers that they
yep,
brought into the movie. And
yeah,
they have a couple what you call normal friends. Frozo the clown is just seems to be a good guy, and he's part of the group. Venus is a SEAL trainer, and she's seems to be a very nice lady. Um, the conjoined twins, one of them is married to a stuttering clown, and one of the scenes that when you're talking about just showing the freaks in real life, when the stuttering clown kisses the conjoined twin, you see the other conjoined twin almost like hold her
Yes.
hands and blush, like she's feeling,
She can feel it.
yeah, she can feel the affection and like she's partaking in it as well. And I just thought that was amazing.
Yeah, I thought it was Violet and Daisy, and then Roscoe, I believe.
Yeah.
And they had some really funny scenes. I was like, this could be a sitcom.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Whenever they get
yeah,
into a fight, the other conjoined twin says
yeah,
that she has somewhere to go. So that he's like, "Oh, you're always using that
yeah. It was
excuse."
very It was it was very It was very honeymooners like a lot of the scenes they had. I was like, all right, this is it's well written.
When Cleopatra finds out that Hans is actually, and you always see Hans and Frida are always perfectly dressed. He's wearing a little tuxedo. Um, that
Yeah,
he actually has a large inheritance, and he's part of this community because he wants to be, but he's actually very, very well off. Well,
yeah,
Cleopatra and her strongman boyfriend Hercules devise a plan for her to marry him and then kill him off to get his money. So unfortunately, Hans breaks off his engagement with Frida, and she
mm.
supportingly tells him she wants him to be happy, which is she's just an amazing woman that can suck it up and do that
Yeah.
for
He's
him.
already an idiot. Yeah, yeah. He's smitten by something he can't have. It's a part of the world that he's never engaged with. He's always kind of been part of the freaks and being being a dwarf, and he's like smitten by this woman that's accepting him, and she's somewhat normal, and he's just kind of like it just glazes over him.
Yeah,
And
it
she's
almost.
yeah.
Sorry, I was just gonna say
No, no, go ahead.
it almost seems like you said, something he cannot have. If you can
Mm.
try to, and they do a good job of trying to put you in his feelings, where his whole life he's never been able to have something like that. And here's where he thinks
Yeah,
maybe I can
yeah. He feels
prove,
like no one respects him.
I'm a regular,
Yeah.
I'm just a man, and I can do this. And you
Yeah.
almost can understand where he's coming from, even though he's making a bad choice.
Right. Which, I mean, we've all made those stupid mistakes, so that's kind of relatable.
One of the two most classic scenes in the movie is the first is the wedding, and you have the few normals there commingling with the freaks, and this is where Cleopatra already begins poisoning Hans's wine, and there's a really unsettling scene. The freaks are passing around a big wedding cup that they all drink from, and they start a chant, "We accept her, one of us, gobble gobble," and they keep repeating it. And it's very chant like, it's very mystical,
Yeah.
and it's really
Yeah.
unsettling.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's almost like that weird like shamanistic like scene that you see in movies where someone drinks from the tea and everyone's just kind of like chanting, and it just yeah, it's a very bizarre scene.
When the cup makes it to Cleopatra, she laughs at them and throws it in their face. And now
Yeah,
she's
she's
drunk.
drunk.
She kisses Hercules right in front of everyone, humiliating Hans, and she eventually puts him on her shoulders and is prancing around with him. Just for someone
Yeah.
who's trying to achieve that, I'm a real man status. It's the ultimate humiliation on his wedding
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. Just demasculating him.
Absolutely. Um, Hans is bedridden from the poison, but he's not dumb. He has figured this out. He realizes he's been played for a fool, and he pretends to keep taking the medicine she's giving him, which she's poisoned the medicine to further this along. But he is
Hmm.
secretly plotting revenge with the other abnormals. And the end scene that I think is amazing. The circus is on the move, and it's a hard rain. And Hans at this point confronts Cleopatra with three of the abnormals backing him up. And I know what you did, and it's very despite their size, they're very menacing, and there's some
Yeah.
great scenes with the freaks crawling under the wagons. And my favorite
Yeah.
guy is the human torso, and he has no arms and no legs, and he's wrapped up.
Johnny Eck.
He's
Yeah.
like a glowworm.
Yeah.
He looks like a glowworm, and he is
Yeah.
crawling under one of the caravans with a knife in his teeth. And you think to
Yeah.
yourself, realistically, what is this guy going to do? But at the same time, it's menacing.
It is, yeah, it is horrible. Well, I mean, he did light a cigarette with a match, so I mean, who knows? But
True.
but yeah, you're right. It almost creates this feeling of claustrophobia because it's under the wagon. So and it's on and like you're stuck in the mud. So it has this very claustrophobic feel to it. And like it's almost, like it's almost like Alien coming down the vent. Like it had that same feeling, like they're coming at him. He can't really move in the mud. He's stuck. It's raining. They're under the wagon, and like here they come with knives. Yeah, it was very harrowing.
Yeah, you got the half man who walks around on his arms, and he moves like super fast. Like he gets around on his arms like so well. Great shots I thought of the rain and the wagon in the dark and these the freaks moving in.
Yeah.
At one point, the wagon with Cleopatra and Hans and his friends in it overturns, and Cleopatra gets out and escapes. But at another cabin, Hercules is trying to kill Venus. Venus is a SEAL trainer, and she's a friend to the freaks. And she overheard the plot about them trying to kill her. Her boyfriend, Frozzo the clown, intervenes to try to save her. And of course, he's fighting Hercules, so he saves her, but he's about to be finished off. But the freaks interfere, and they injure Hercules, driving him off with them in pursuit. And we don't get to see really the conclusion of this pursuit. I thought the attack the night of the wagons was an awesome scene, but it does kind of end without telling you like what happened to Hercules, for example. And I heard there was a version that's been lost where you read about this, where they removed Hercules' manhood.
And then he sings falsetto.
Yes, he did. Yes, he would. But instead, we go to a wraparound that goes back to a tent of curiosities in the original. The Barker who was speaking and telling people this tale.
So it goes right back to the original scene of the movie.
Yes. Now shows us what's in the pen that he was standing over that we never got to see. And it's Cleopatra as a squawking human duck. And this is horrific. Her tongue has been removed. One eye is bulged out. She has no legs. Her hands have been deformed to look like flippers, and her torso is permanently tarred and feathered. And this is the work of the freaks, what they had done to her. And it's really, it's 1932. It's really quite shocking.
Yeah, I agree. This is way ahead of its. This is the first of its kind. I don't even want to say ahead of its time. It's the first of its kind. I mean, we're talking like decades of movies that had to have been influenced by this.
Yeah, it's like I said,
Human Centipede to Walrus to you know what I mean. You can just go like just so many movies. It's like, well, this was the first one.
Yeah, and those oddity shows have existed in carnivals, and there's a reason they exist. People will pay to see it. But to be presented this way, I thought was a beautiful story, and shocking in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
The end scene is we go to Hans is now living in his mansion, and he's visited by Frozzo, Venus, and Frida. He's depressed. He's humiliated. He knows he's screwed up, but Frida tells him that she still loves him, and they share a touching hug, which I thought was kind of nice because they were great characters right from the get-go.
That wasn't on the version that I watched. It just ends with the duck, with the duck lady. Okay. That was it. It just ends right there.
I was wondering about that because I was reading there's so many versions out there, and it's hard to get. I have what's supposed to be the most complete version, but that is how it ends. This movie was banned in England for 30 years due to the shocking subject matter. And I think there's a commentary on class distinction and privilege that runs through the whole thing that can't be ignored.
Yes.
And yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, it's interesting because a movie about marginalized groups of society in today's world, like that, that you wouldn't ban that. Like I mean, we've fought for X amount of civil rights for 50, 60, 70, 80 years, like just spent so much time, like you wouldn't expect that to be something that you would see banned in film. But like in 1930s, they were just shunning it, which is to me mind blowing.
If a movie makes you uncomfortable, I think it's doing a hell of a job.
Yeah, and I think that was the whole point, because Todd Browning spent time in the circus when he was younger, and so this was something like dear to his heart. You know what I mean? Like he had spent time with these people, and he was like, "Hey, this deserves to have light shown on it. This is a part of society that most people don't see, but they're people like everyone else."
Yeah, and that's really what I love about it is, despite the shocking appearance of some of them and some of the deformities that they are dealing with, and they are fascinating to look at and fascinating to see perform, but it also shows them as just people. And in the end, they are a close-knit community that cares for one another, that sticks up for one another. And it's a beautiful thing to see. And the beautiful people, quote unquote, Cleopatra and Hercules, are evil and manipulative, and it just flips everything.
Ugly on the inside. Yeah,
absolutely. It just flips everything on its end, and I think it's beautiful. And
then to a deeper extent, like when you're watching it and you feel horrified and you feel disgusted by watching it, well, it's a regular narrative. It's like, well, maybe you're the monster for being so judgmental for this marginalized group that you're not used to, and it almost makes you just self-reflect on that, which I think was done on purpose.
Yeah, I think so too. It's funny because this movie kind of, it didn't do great box office. It got, like you said, shunned. It was banned all over the world, particularly England had I think the longest ban on it. But in the 60s, people revisited it. And really, if, in the 80s, if you started reading top 10 all-time lists, it was all over the place. It really became recognized as a classic and way ahead of its time, as you mentioned. I just think it's an awesome movie, and I really enjoy it.
I agree 100%. It's a genuinely enjoyable movie on top of it being so iconic and ahead of its time, which makes it kind of more enjoyable for some reason. But yeah, it's a great film.
Great. Well, now you've heard, these are our best of the decade, the 1930s. Certainly a topic we'll revisit again with different decades in mind. But that is our show for this week. Again, next week we're back with some creepy clown movies that may be of interest, and they'll certainly move us forward into a more modern territory.
Yeah, these are some great ones.
For sure. Well, thank you for listening this week. We appreciate you as always. I am Jerry. That's Matt, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jerry.
Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.